This is an influence operation.
We've been investigating a transnational organisation that are watching you. They collect your data and then they tell your government that you could be a threat.
So we've been looking at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue and their role with New Zealand. Now, this organisation is actually a transnational organisation that is not based here in New Zealand. They're based out of London, Germany, France, and the United States.
What are your main concerns when it comes to the ISD? Why are they such a problem?
They're performing a role which is akin to what our intelligence community here in New Zealand should be performing. The problem with that is they're contracting that service to our government and they're not bound by the laws of our intelligence community in New Zealand. So that means that they can spy on just blanket New Zealand citizens without the legislation that protects New Zealand citizens from government overreach.
Do the citizens of New Zealand have any transparency over these reports?
We're asking for these reports. We're asking the government to give us these reports. It's taking some time to get them. Hopefully we will get them and we'll be able to see exactly what the Institute for Strategic Dialogue has said about New Zealand and New Zealanders.
What is the overall strategy for achieving the change that they want to see?
So we've got this document here, which is their trustees report for the year ended 31st of December 2021. The Institute for Strategic Dialogue is an independent think and do tank that studies and develops policy and operational responses to the rising challenges of hate, polarisation and extremism.
Information project, but on steroids. At a much larger scale with potentially a lot more influence.
They make the Disinformation Project look like child's play. They also talk about action programming. The Institute for Strategic Dialogue innovates, trials and scales cutting-edge interventions that empower cities, practitioners and civic leaders to mitigate hate, polarisation and disinformation. They're actually picking people out and they're working with people to shape the narrative the way they want to see it. This is undemocratic because this is one organisation outside New Zealand who clearly state in here that they are working to enhance the capacity of key players to act effectively and strategically. So they're an organisation that is strategically impacting politics in New Zealand. Should we trust them? I don't think so. Not at all. An IRS filing from the US branch of the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. Now, what's interesting in here, in filing for their tax-exempt status, they have to briefly describe the organisation's mission or most significant activities. And it's quite concerning reading this, given that they're influencing or advising our government here in New Zealand at the taxpayer's expense. And so they write, ISD, or Institute for Strategic Dialogue, US, is a not-for-profit organisation providing a transatlantic bridge for leaders in government, media, and the private sectors of the United States and the wider European neighbourhood to formulate cooperative approaches for addressing the challenge of long-range threats to international and communal peace, and to enhance the capacity of key players to act effectively and strategically in the global arena.
I mean, it's pretty clear that they're trying to use all of these different sectors to manipulate them for their own agenda.
This is an influence operation, right? Transatlantic bridge. So they're bridging leaders in government, media, the private sector.
That term bridge is interesting because that's a term that we've heard recently with Kate Hannah trying to say that organisations and people that are saying things the government doesn't like, they're bridging these different sectors. It's a term you don't hear many people say, but yet these organisations that are seemingly intent on censoring people tend to use that quite often.
Yeah, I mean, they've used it themselves here in this one to say, well, that's what they're doing. They're bridging leaders in government, media, and the private sectors. In another document here, and this is from the UK Institute for Strategic Dialogue, they state how the charity spends its money. An independent think tank working with leaders in government, business, media, and academia to develop multi-country responses to the major security and socio-economic challenges of our time and to enhance Europe's capacity to act effectively in the global arena. Activities include research, specialised task forces, high-level policy briefings, and cross-border networks. So this is a private organisation influencing through policy briefings with contact with the media. And we can see that media component back in this document in the trustees report, where they actually outline all the media contact that they've actually had. You'll see that just about everything they report on is right-wing extremism. Again, it seems to be this influence operation that is relatively politically biased. They have what looks to be an agenda.
So how much influence do they have here in New Zealand? Have we seen direct reports of what they're doing here in New Zealand, what kind of impact they're having?
So the Department of Internal Affairs actually contracted them to produce a bunch of reports. And in 2021, they paid $229,957.42 for these reports. And again, we're working on getting those reports so we can actually see the nature of the reporting. But from the titles, it does look, it is all, again, predictably censored around this idea of right-wing extremism.
The interesting part about this to me is that they say disinformation and misinformation and hate speech. But what we've seen coming out on the left is that they'll classify anything that they disagree with as disinformation, regardless of how accurate it is. A prime example was Hunter Biden's laptop. They tried to say that was disinformation, Russian disinformation, and it was true and accurate information that is now going through the court proceedings. I mean, it's crazy to me that they can label something disinformation, then work as a private security organization and somehow tell our government these people are acceptable, these people aren't, based purely on their own perceptions and biases rather than facts.
Well, that's the weaponization that these types of groups have, is they're using these labels to cancel people. Now, time is actually on our side because time reveals all things, and that's exactly what happens when they make these claims about mis and disinformation, like the Hunter Biden laptop. They say this is Russian disinformation. Well, time catches up on them and they get found out. They get caught out in the lie. And so really, who's producing the disinformation? They do tell us that they're acting effectively and strategically, that they are making bridges between government, media, and the private sectors. And if we look at that Hunter Biden laptop, for an example, we can see that's exactly what's happened in that case, where you had some intelligence agency officials writing a letter to say this is Russian disinformation. And then they spun that in the media, and that was cover for government. So we can see all of these things come together. Again, going back to that textbook that we've referred to before, Media of Mass Communication, they talk in there about agenda setting effect. They don't tell people what to think. They just tell people what to think about. And so by having that sort of spin on what they cover and what they publish in their reports makes us think that right-wing extremism is a really big problem and we have no left-wing extremes. But I think recent events, even here in New Zealand, show that actually there's a massive rise in left-wing extremism and the lengths that they're prepared to go to push their ideology. They're prepared to get violent, and we saw that up in Auckland, and they are prepared to use government, media, and the private sectors to achieve their ideological objectives.
Are you sick of the government-funded media here in New Zealand? Well, so are the team at nznewsessentials.com. They are fighting against legacy media to bring you the news that you need without the government's influence. Head to nznewsessentials.com, subscribe and be part of their newsletter.